So the age-old question that we often hear about is, which was better, the book or the movie? And of course, there are so many t-shirts and so much swag and magnets and all that stuff that say, the book was better. I'll only accept an adaptation from book to movie if it's all about hitting every single shot perfectly. And I mean, the success of the 6-hour Pride and Prejudice from the BBC kind of shows that that is a thing. But also, guess what? The 2005 version did really well, and it was definitely not a shot-for-shot adaptation, nor did it really capture the same Regency vibes. So while people like to say that they want an absolute shot-for-shot adaptation of a book, the actual reality can show things differently. And that's something that I chatted about in my most recent current events podcast for my paid subscribers on the Author Culture Substack. But I wanted to give y'all a little bit of a taste of this and open up a conversation about what it looks like to try to adapt a book onto the big screen, or even to take a beloved movie and change things a bit around for the live action, and what you think about that and the success or failure that can have in terms of connecting with those original fans of the original work. So super excited to dive into this with some recent news and events. So this is Janeen Ippolito. Let's chat. And this is the Author Culture Podcast, where we are all about helping ambitious science fiction and fantasy authors just like you achieve your unique, sustainable success in a chaotic publishing world. And in this little quick excerpt of my longer, unfiltered podcast for my paid subscribers on Substack, we're going to talk just a little bit about what it looks like to adapt something from a book version to a movie version. And in the case of one of these things, we're going to be talking about what it looks like to adapt something from a book version to a movie version to a different movie version, and what people can have opinions about versus what the money says about it, because those can be a couple of different things. And I think that's always something that I've considered and sometimes gotten a little bit confused over, because I hear people with, their declarations of it must be a perfect shot-by-shot duplicate of the book. And they say that, and they wear the t-shirts. But then the movie adaptations seem to do really well. So it's like, clearly a lot of people who didn't read the book are okay with the movie adaptation, or maybe a lot of people read the book and aren't quite as outspoken and just went to the movie anyway. And trust me, I am super sympathetic to critiques of unfaithful movie adaptations. Ella Enchanted is one of my favorite books of all time, was one of the things that inspired me to write my own YA fairy tale retellings, and the movie is just, I can't even. Nope. Not a thing. Not a thing. I would like to pretend it doesn't even exist. And it hurt worse for me because I watched all the casting decisions and was super excited about all the casting decisions, even the ones that were a little bit different from the book. And then to actually behold the finished product of the movie, I was like, how dare you call this The Next Princess Bride? No, it is not The Next Princess Bride. I love The Princess Bride. This is not The Next Princess Bride. So I understand people who have these very strong emotions. But also it's interesting because in terms of the data, it doesn't always show that these movies are necessarily less popular. And in terms of current events with this, I am, of course, looking at the upcoming live action adaptation of How to Tame Your Dragon, which is a really interesting one to follow because the original books, How to Tame Your Dragon, I remember when they first came out, I was working at a bookstore at the time, so I was stocking them on the shelves. And of course, when I was stocking books on the shelves, you'd also dust the books on the shelves, and you would sneak peeks of the books of the shelves until your manager was like, you get to sneak peeks, but you don't get to read them because the goal is to just be familiar with the content so you can hand sell it, not to actually read the books. That's not what you're being paid for. And it's fair. It was fair. But temptation was real. And the actual books were sort of like, they were told you how to tame your dragon. The whole narrative of the movie really had nothing to do with the books. And so when I first saw the movie, I was like, oh, this is a really fun movie. How does it connect with the books? And the thing is, the narrative of the books and the way they were structured really wasn't the kind of thing that you could easily adapt into a movie. And so changes had to be made. Changes were made. And the movie itself is very well loved and has a fantastic soundtrack. And then they said, okay, we're going to take the movie and we are going to make a live action version of the animated movie. So that happened. And I've been seeing the trailers for it. It looks pretty good. Sometimes I wonder if we really need this many live action adaptations, but this happens. But the interesting thing is now we have people who are attached to their version of the movie, which itself doesn't have a lot in connection with the books, but the movie has become its own lore, and now people are, hit or miss on the movie. This interesting article that I found here talks about how critics were mixed about How to Tame Your Dragon, but Rotten Tomatoes is doing really well so far, and people are enjoying it. It's 83% based out of 40 reviews at the time of this podcast, so I'm sure things will change. But 83% out of 40 reviews is considered certified fresh. And reading directly from the article here, despite plenty of complaints about it being essentially a shot-for-shot remake, one critic hailed it as a squandered opportunity. This score should help ensure How to Train Your Dragon dethrones Lilo and Stitch at the global box office this weekend. And of course, Universal just opened a whole land in its theme park about How to Tame Your Dragon. We are doing the merchandising here, guys. It is happening. But it's interesting because the critics complain that it's a shot-for-shot remake of the original movie. But that's the kind of thing that pleases a lot of fans. But that original movie did not reflect the book. Conversely, as authors, we can think hypothetically what would happen if my book got optioned and made into a movie. Would I want all the creative control? Would I want no creative control? Personally, I'm going to be on the side of I would want all the creative control, but then would probably be talked out of some of it because I'd really have no idea what it was doing. But some people really are like, I would only want it to be my particular way, and other authors don't really care as much about that. And so my question for you listeners out there is, as readers, do you want shot-for-shot remakes? Do you want something a little more creative? As authors, how much would you want a movie adaptation to reflect your book, and how much would you say, well, there's certain parts of this book that don't really work on the big screen? And I think that's something that's valuable to consider. Going back to another popular movie series that now has people being diehard fans of the movie but don't read the books. Of course, I'm talking about Lord of the Rings. You have people who are super huge fans of the Peter Jackson adaptations. But when those movies came out when I was a teenager, there was a huge internet hubbub about the changes and the differences and how it wasn't really being authentic to the books. And nowadays, when we have Rings of Power, people are like, Rings of Power isn't like the original. And I'm like, oh, it isn't like the books? Well, no, it's not like Peter Jackson. And I'm like, Peter Jackson is not Tolkien. Peter Jackson did an adaptation. So it's interesting how people latch on to different kinds of storytelling, and that becomes their thing, even if the core book is still sort of lost back here, and it's not really connected as much to everything else. And Tolkien was another situation where Peter Jackson added a lot of fight scenes, because Tolkien was not known for writing huge, massive, riveting fight scenes. I believe the one with the cave troll was quite short. It wasn't really the most interesting thing for him to do. It wasn't his favorite, so he didn't write these epic 50-page fight scenes. And so Peter Jackson expanded that a lot on the big screen because we need the visuals. And so when you're thinking about adapting something from a book to a movie, you have to think about how you're going to take things that worked well on the page in a way that readers can decode by reading the marks on the page and imagining what those marks mean and creating a picture of that in their head. You have to figure out how to create that kind of connection on the big screen. And I think that's one of the reasons why there can be so much hubbub over movie adaptations, is because each individual reader can have a completely different perspective about how they interpret or decode those words on the page that they read on their couch or listened on audiobook or read in their bed or whatever. They have a different way of interpreting it, but the movie makers have to decide the one way that it's going to look visually, because it's film as a visual storytelling mode, as well as audio, of course, with the music in the background and with words being spoken and given expression, all of that. So it's interesting to see how these things are fleshing out with How to Train Your Dragon, and with critics being critical of it being a shot-for-shot remake, but then fans going, no, that's what I want. That's close to the original. But then the original is not really the original. It's not really like the book in the same way. So something to think about as we're considering different storytelling mediums for especially science fiction and fantasy books, because that's what this podcast is about, but books in general, and how people consider those things and look at that whole process. And so now I'm curious to hear what your thoughts are, listeners and viewers on YouTube. Do you want to see a book adapted shot by shot on the big screen? Are you more open to flexible interpretation? As an author, would you want a shot for shot adaptation? Are you more flexible? And what do you think about this idea that the original book can get lost in layers and layers of adaptations of storytelling? Does that decrease the original value of the original intellectual property, the IP, the book? Or does that just give people more ways of exploring it and enjoying that kind of storyverse? I would love to hear your thoughts, feelings, respectful feedback in comments below. And thank you so much for hanging out with me on this short current events commentary. If you're interested in more of this, I do a couple of these every month or so for my Author Culture paid subscribers. For now, go forth and be awesome.